The story begins under a bruised twilight sky as Ethan Carter's car rumbles over the cracked asphalt leading into Nocton Vale, a town so isolated that the trees seem to lean inward, as if hiding something. The air is thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the only sound is the distant cawing of crows. Too many crows. The town itself looks like a postcard frozen in time, neatly kept houses, a diner with flickering neon, and a clock tower that hasn't struck in years. But there's something wrong beneath the surface. Ethan, a journalist with a reputation for chasing urban legends, steps out of his car, his boots crunching on gravel. He's here because of the whispers, the kind that slither through internet forums and late-night radio shows. A town where no one is awake at midnight, a place where people walk but don't remember. His editor had laughed, called it another dead-end ghost story, but Ethan sees the way the locals avoid his gaze when he enters the diner. The waitress pours his coffee with trembling hands. The old man in the corner booth mutters under his breath, "Shouldn't have come." At the Nocton Inn, the proprietor, a gaunt man named Harlan, slides a brass key across the desk. His voice is a dry rasp. "Checkout's at 11. When Ethan frowns, Harlan's grip tightens on the ledger. "Don't go outside after midnight. Lock your door, and whatever you hear, don't answer it." Before Ethan can press him, Harlan turns away, leaving the words hanging like a noose. Upstairs, Ethan's room smells of mothballs and something faintly metallic. The wallpaper curls at the edges, revealing stains that might be water damage or something else. He unpacks his recorder, his notes, the newspaper clippings about hikers who vanished near Nocton Vale, their tents found zipped shut from the inside. Outside his window, the last light bleeds from the sky. The town holds its breath. Then, as the clock tower shudders to life, its gears grinding like bones, Ethan realizes it hasn't struck in years, but tonight it's counting down to midnight. The road to Nocton Vale was the kind of forgotten highway that didn't appear on most maps, narrow, cracked, and swallowed by towering pines that leaned in like silent sentinels. Ethan Carter's headlights cut through the dusk, the beams catching motes of dust and something else, flecks of pale ash that drifted like snow in July. His GPS had blinked out 20 minutes back, and now the only signs of civilization were the occasional weather-worn markers. Nocton Vale, 5 miles. The letters faded as if someone had tried to scrub them away. When the town finally emerged from the trees, it looked less like a living community and more like a museum exhibit. Neat clapboard houses with lace curtains, a diner, its neon sign buzzing weakly. "Lucy's, always open." A lie. The chairs were stacked on tables, the door locked. A gas station with pumps straight out of the 1950s, the price frozen at $1.25 per gallon. And yet, no people, no kids on bikes, no porch lights flickering on against the gathering dark. Just the oppressive weight of being watched. Ethan parked outside the Nocton Inn, a 3-story relic with a sagging porch. The second he stepped out of the car, the air changed, thick with the scent of wet earth and something sweetly rotten underneath, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun. The inn's door creaked open before he could knock. Harlan, the proprietor, stood in the threshold, backlit by a single flickering bulb. Gaunt, with yellowed nails and a too-wide smile, he looked like a man who hadn't slept in years. "You're the reporter." Not a question. His voice was a dry whisper, as if he'd worn it out screaming. Ethan nodded, hefting his bag. "Just here for a few nights. Heard the town's quiet." Harlan's grin didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, it is, until it ain't." He slid a tarnished key across the desk. "Room 3. Checkout's at 11. Not noon? No. A pause. You'll hear things tonight. Voices, footsteps. Don't answer 'em. Don't even look. His knuckles whitened on the ledger. And whatever you do, don't go outside after midnight. Upstairs, the hallway stretched too long, the wallpaper peeling to reveal patches of black mold that shifted if Ethan stared too long. Room 3's door groaned like something in pain. Inside, the air was stale, the bed stiff as a coffin lining. A single window overlooked the town square, where the clock tower stood, its hands frozen at 11:47. Ethan frowned. Hadn't Harlan said it was almost 9? Then, a sound, distant at first. A child's laughter, echoing from the empty street below. But when he rushed to the window, the square was deserted. Except for the clock tower, its hands now inched toward midnight. Ethan sat at the rickety desk in room 3, his notes spread out under the dim glow of a flickering lamp. The town's silence was suffocating. No crickets, no wind, just the occasional creak of the inn's old bones settling. He checked his watch. 11:58 p.m. Then, the clock tower struck. It shouldn't have worked. The gears had looked rusted through, the hands frozen. But now, the sound shuddered through Knockton Vale like a dying man's gasp. 12 slow, hollow chimes that vibrated in Ethan's teeth. On the final toll, the lamp sputtered out. Darkness. And then, footsteps. Not just one or two. Dozens. A slow, shuffling procession right outside his door. Ethan held his breath, pressing his ear to the wood. The steps were wrong. Not the purposeful stride of people awake, but something heavier, dragging, like sleepers moving through water. He inched the curtain aside. The moon cast a sickly pallor over the town square. They were all there, men, women, children, even old Mrs. Wilkins from the diner, her hair still in curlers. Their eyes were open, glazed, reflecting the moonlight like wet glass. None of them spoke. None of them seemed to breathe. They moved in perfect unison, a silent parade toward the tree line at the edge of town. Ethan's pulse hammered in his throat. This wasn't just sleepwalking. This was something orchestrated. Then, the little girl at the back of the group turned her head. Not toward him, just slightly, as if listening to a voice he couldn't hear. Her lips parted. "They're calling us." Her voice was wrong, not a child's whisper, but something layered, echoing, like multiple voices speaking at once. And then she was gone, merging back into the crowd as they disappeared into the forest. The clock tower read 12:03 a.m. Ethan realized 3 things in rapid succession. No one in Knockton Vale was asleep at midnight. They weren't waking up either. Whatever was calling them, it wasn't human. And worst of all, he was the only one who could hear it. Morning came too quietly to Knockton Vale. Ethan hadn't slept. He'd spent the hours after midnight pressed against the window, watching the last of the sleepwalkers stagger back into their homes just before dawn. Their movements had been sluggish then, like marionettes with cut strings. By sunrise, the town had snapped back to eerie normalcy. The diner reopened, kids played in the square, and the gas station attendant whistled while wiping down those ancient pumps. No one remembered. No one knew. Except, perhaps, the town doctor. Dr. Miriam Voss's clinic was a squat brick building at the end of Maple Street, its waiting room empty, its walls lined with yellowed medical diagrams. She was in her 60s, with sharp gray eyes and hands that didn't shake when she poured Ethan a cup of bitter, overbrewed coffee. "You saw them last night," she said, before he could speak. Not a question. Ethan set his recorder on the desk. "You're not surprised." She laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "I've lived here 40 years, Mr. Carter. I stopped being surprised a long time ago." Then, in a voice so low it was almost a confession, she told him, It started in the 1950s, after the Blackwater chemical plant opened on the edge of town. There were experiments, something to do with sleep, with dream control. The plant shut down overnight after an incident, but the effects lingered. Now, every night at midnight, the town obeys a call no one hears. And the ones who resist? Ethan asked. Dr. Voss's face darkened. She slid a file across the desk. Inside were EEG readouts, all showing the same jagged spike in brain activity at 11:59 p.m. They don't sleepwalk, she whispered. They dream. Then, her hand trembling for the first time, she flipped to the last page. A photograph of a man strapped to a hospital bed, his eyes wide, his mouth frozen mid-scream. Scrawled beneath it, "They're not dreams, they're memories," and beneath that, a single word, underlined 3 times in red. Loop. Ethan's coffee had gone cold. Somewhere in the walls of the clinic, pipes groaned like a living thing. You're saying this town is trapped? Dr. Voss didn't answer. Outside, the clock tower struck noon, but the hands never moved. The Blackwater chemical plant loomed at the edge of Nocton Vale like a rotten tooth. Rusted fences sagging, windows shattered, the skeletal remains of machinery jutting from its corpse. The air smelled of ozone and something older, something chemical that clung to the back of Ethan's throat. He shouldn't have been able to break in. The padlock on the service entrance was rusted shut, the chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. But when he pushed, the door groaned open like it had been waiting for him. Inside, the darkness was absolute. His flashlight cut a feeble path through dust so thick it swam in the beam. The walls were papered in peeling safety notices and faded evacuation diagrams, all leading to sub-level B. The elevator was dead, its cables snapped. He took the stairs, each step groaning under his weight. The deeper he descended, the colder it got. His breath fogged, his fingers numbed. Then, the door at the bottom. Authorized personnel only. The lab was frozen in time. Beakers lined the counters, their contents long evaporated into toxic residue. A chalkboard smeared with half-erased equations. And in the center of the room, a chair, the chair, its leather straps cracked with age, its headrest stained a dull brown. Ethan's light caught the edge of a desk. A journal lay open, its pages brittle as dead leaves. Dr. Elias Lorne's personal notes. The entries started clinical, almost excited. Breakthrough today. Subject 12 exhibited REM intrusion while awake. The compound works. The shared dreaming trials begin tomorrow. Imagine a workforce that never sleeps, never questions, never resists. Then the tone shifted. Subject 12 is screaming again, says they're in the walls, administered sedative. The others are hearing it now, too, the humming from the forest. The final entry was scrawled in frantic, ink-blotted strokes. It's not a dream, it's a door, and something on the other side is pushing through. The town is... The rest was illegible, but beneath it, tucked between the pages, Ethan found a photograph. A group of men in lab coats smiling. Dr. Lorne at the center, and behind them, blurred but unmistakable, a shadow. Tall, thin, watching. Ethan's flashlight flickered. Somewhere in the lab, a glass beaker rolled off a shelf and shattered. He wasn't alone. The air in the forest was thick with the scent of wet earth and something metallic, like old blood on the wind. Ethan moved like a ghost between the trees, his breath shallow, his flashlight off. He didn't need it. The sleepwalkers glowed faintly in the moonlight, their pale skin reflecting the dim glow like moths drawn to an unseen flame. They moved in perfect silence. No twigs snapping, no whispered words, just the slow, rhythmic shuffle of bare feet on damp soil. Ethan kept his distance, but the forest seemed to conspire against him. Branches snagged his jacket, roots twisted underfoot, and the deeper they went, the louder the humming grew, a sound that wasn't quite sound, more a vibration in his teeth, in his bones. Then, the trees opened into a clearing. A stone circle stood at its center, the rocks towering and ancient, their surfaces carved with symbols that made Ethan's eyes ache to look at. The townspeople arranged themselves around it, their vacant faces turned upward, their mouths slack. At the heart of the circle stood him, the shadow from the photograph, tall, gaunt, dressed in tattered remnants of a Blackwater lab coat. His skin was too pale, stretched too tight over sharp bones, and his eyes were wrong. Black, shining, reflecting nothing. The humming swelled, the sleepwalkers swayed. Then the shadow man raised his hands, and the townspeople answered. Not in their own voices, but in his, 100 mouths shaping the same guttural syllables, the same alien words. Ethan's ears popped, the air pressure spiked, and for a single horrifying second, the sky above the clearing ripped open, a yawning void, a glimpse of something vast and pulsing beyond it. Then, a hand clamped over Ethan's mouth. Dr. Voss yanked him backward into the brush just as the sleepwalker's head snapped toward where he'd been standing. Her whisper was barely audible over the ringing in his ears. You look too long, you become one of them. The void sealed shut. The townspeople turned away, and the shadow man smiled. The lab basement smelled of ozone and something older, something that had festered in the dark for decades. Ethan's hands shook as he gripped the rusted lever of the machine at the room's center, its steel surface etched with the same unnatural symbols from the forest stones. Dr. Voss stood guard at the door, her pistol trained on the stairwell, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. It won't be enough to just destroy it, she warned. You have to wake them up. Above them, the floorboards groaned. They were coming. The sleepwalkers, no longer shuffling, no longer docile. Their eyes were black now, their movements jerky and precise, like marionettes controlled by a will not their own. The shadow man walked among them, his 2 long fingers brushing their shoulders as he passed, his mouth moving in silent command. Ethan's fingers found the machine's core, a glass orb filled with swirling black smoke that pulsed in time with the townspeople's footsteps. Inside it, something scratched. Do it! Dr. Voss shouted as the first sleepwalker reached the bottom step. Ethan raised the fire axe. The orb shattered. The scream that tore through the lab wasn't human. It wasn't from this world. It was the sound of a door slamming shut, of something vast and hungry being locked out. The sleepwalkers collapsed. The shadow man staggered, his form flickering like a dying film reel. For the first time, his voice rang out, not in their heads but in the air, raw and guttural. You don't know what you've done. Then he was gone. Not dead. Gone. Silence. Then, a gasp. One by one, the townspeople woke, their screams filling the lab as decades of stolen memories flooded back. The experiments, the forest, the thing in the dark that had been using them, feeding on them, wearing them like skins. Outside, the clock tower struck midnight. But this time, its hands began to move forward. 3 days later, Ethan stood at the town limits, his car packed, his notes complete. Nocton Vale was different now, quieter, haunted, but alive. Dr. Voss handed him a final file. Inside, a single photograph. The shadow man, standing at the edge of the forest. Dated yesterday. Ethan looked up. The trees swayed in a wind that didn't touch the grass. And somewhere, deep in the pines, something hummed. It's not over, is it? He asked. Dr. Voss lit a cigarette, her hands steady for the first time in years. Nothing ever is. The engine roared to life. Behind them, the clock tower chimed. The dawn that broke over Knockton Vale was the first real sunrise the town had seen in decades. Ethan stood on the porch of the Knockton Inn, watching as pale gold light spilled across the square, painting the cracked pavement and weathered storefronts in hues that almost looked warm. Almost. The townspeople moved like ghosts themselves now, hollow-eyed, trembling, speaking in hushed tones as they drifted back to homes that no longer felt like theirs. Some clutched at their heads as if trying to hold the memories in. Others wept silently, their tears cutting tracks through faces still slack with shock. Dr. Voss had turned the clinic into a triage center. The line stretched around the block. Ethan's recorder sat heavy in his pocket, filled with voices recounting nightmares that weren't dreams at all, decades of stolen nights, of walking in the dark while something else wore their skin like a suit. A little girl, the same one who had whispered "They're calling us," clung to her mother's leg, her tiny fingers knotted in the fabric of her dress. When she caught Ethan looking, she didn't smile, she flinched. Harlan found him at checkout. The innkeeper's hands were steady now, but his eyes were haunted. "You leavin'?" he asked, though they both knew the answer. Ethan nodded. Someone has to tell the story. A pause, then quieter. "You think it's really gone?" The question hung between them. Ethan thought of the shattered machine, of the shadow man's fading scream, of the way the townspeople still twitched in their sleep. Before he could answer, a scream ripped through the morning air. They ran to the square, where old Mr. Hargrove was on his knees, clawing at his ears. "It's back!" he wailed. I heard it humming." The crowd recoiled. Dr. Voss pushed through, her stethoscope already out, but Ethan didn't miss the way her gaze darted to the tree line. The forest stood unnaturally still, the pines like sentinels holding their breath. That night, Ethan packed his car in silence. The inn's neon sign buzzed overhead, casting his shadow long and wavering across the asphalt. He tossed his bag into the passenger seat, then froze. There, half buried under his notes, was a file he didn't recognize. Inside, a single page. A child's drawing, crude but unmistakable. The stone circle. The shadow man. And in the corner, a tiny stick figure with a recorder, watching. Labeled in shaky crayon, "He sees you." Ethan's breath fogged in the sudden cold. Slowly, he turned. The clock tower read midnight. The inn's lights winked out. And from the forest, faint but growing louder, the sound of humming. Tires screech as Ethan's car peels onto the highway. In the rearview mirror, Knockton Vale shrinks, its streets empty, its windows dark. Then, just before the trees swallow it whole, a flicker of movement, a shadow, tall and thin, standing at the town limits, watching, waiting. Credits roll. Post-credit scene. A motel room. Static hisses on a CRT TV. Ethan's recorder plays in the background, his voice recounting the events at Knockton Vale. The camera pulls back to reveal the bed, unslept in, the shower running, and on the nightstand, the child's drawing, now with a new addition, a second stick figure, standing behind the first. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.